February 26, 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The desert wind screamed through the mountain gaps, carrying with it the bitter scent of burnt oil and scorched steel. The sun had barely clawed its way over the ridges, yet already the battlefield below shimmered with heat and smoke. German Panzer Frees stood like patient predators among the dunes, their long 75mm guns glinting in the rising light. From his cupola, Oberleutnant Karl Hennig adjusted his field glasses and squinted toward the horizon. More of them, he muttered, the corners of his mouth curling upward. Through the haze, a column of American tanks rattled into view, stubby, box-shaped, their turrets high and awkward. The Germans had heard rumors of this new Allied tank, but seeing it in person was underwhelming. One of Hennig's crewmen, a gunner named Weiss, laughed over the intercom. "They look like tractors, Herr Oberleutnant. Toys with armor. Let's see how well they burn," Hennig replied dryly. The first exchange was brutal. The German guns barked, and in moments 2 of the American tanks erupted into flames, their hatches bursting open as black smoke spiraled into the desert sky. The surviving Shermans swerved awkwardly, their machine guns chattering in panic. The Germans, trained and precise, made short work of the rest. When the firing ceased, silence settled over the pass. Hennig stepped down from his Panzer, walking among the wrecks. He ran a gloved hand over the scorched armor of a Sherman's hull. The metal was thin, its welds crude compared to the precision of German engineering. He smirked. "If this is what America sends to war, they'll run out of tanks before we run out of shells." But not far from the smoke, a pair of Allied mechanics were already at work. Under the cover of a rocky outcrop, they were dragging damaged Shermans back with trucks marking coordinates, sending messages back to the rear. They weren't giving up. They were studying. They were learning. That same evening, in an Allied field headquarters near Tebessa, General Dwight D. Eisenhower listened to the battle reports with a furrowed brow. The Shermans had been mauled, but their engines had run, their supply lines had held, and unlike the German Panzers, replacements were already on the way. By next week, there would be more. Dozens more. For the Germans, it seemed like just another victory in the desert. But in the long arc of the war, something fundamental had shifted. In the distance, as dusk fell over the dunes, the low rumble of approaching engines echoed again. Not 1 or 2, but an entire company's worth. The same squat silhouettes. The same olive-green hulls. The Shermans were coming back, thousands of miles from the dust and death of North Africa. The war was being fought in an entirely different theater, one lit not by tracer rounds, but by welding torches. Detroit, Michigan, April 1943. Inside the Ford Motor Company's massive River Rouge plant, the air pulsed with the clang of steel and the rhythmic hiss of pneumatic tools. Assembly lines once built for automobiles now churned out the war's most prolific machine, the M4 Sherman. Where German tanks were crafted like fine instruments, each component machined with painstaking precision, the Sherman was born of an entirely different philosophy: volume over virtuosity. Foreman Frank Delaney shouted over the din, "Keep it moving, boys." Another one off the line every 5 minutes. Sparks flew as workers, men and women alike, bolted armor plates into place. Engines roared to life for the first time as the final coat of olive drab paint was sprayed across their hulls. The result wasn't elegant. It wasn't even the best tank on paper. But it was good enough, and it could be built in numbers that defied imagination. By the summer of 1943, America's factories were producing nearly 2,000 Shermans a month. The Chrysler tank arsenal alone rolled out one every 38 minutes. Across the ocean, German officers scoffed at the statistics. They preferred to trust in their technological superiority. The Tigerine, with its monstrous 88mm gun, could destroy a Sherman from over a mile away. The Panther, sleek and deadly, outclassed it in every measurable way. But there was a flaw in the German logic, one that would soon become fatally clear. Each Tiger required 300,000 man-hours to produce. Each Panther over 150,000. A single damaged gearbox could sideline a German tank for weeks. Meanwhile, in America, a broken Sherman was stripped for parts, repaired in hours, and sent right back into battle. Back in Tunisia, Karl Hennig's unit received orders to redeploy to Sicily. On the long journey north, his crew joked about the Sherman factories they'd heard about. Rumors that the Americans built tanks like toys. When they landed in Sicily that July, Those rumors began to feel very real. In every village, every hedgerow, every blasted road, the Germans encountered more Shermans, sometimes destroyed, often replaced within days. It was as though the enemy had endless hands, endless tools, endless steel. Even as German crews mocked the Tommy Cookers, a nickname earned from how easily Shermans caught fire, there was a growing unease beneath the laughter. No matter how many they burned, more always came. By autumn, as the Allies prepared to leap from Italy toward the heart of Europe, Hennig found himself studying aerial reconnaissance photos. In one image, he saw row after row of tanks lined up on English soil. He counted for a while, then gave up. He turned to his adjutant. "They can't possibly have that many," he said quietly. The adjutant didn't answer. He didn't need to. For while Germany's factories lay shattered under Allied bombs, across the Atlantic the assembly lines of Detroit, Cleveland, and Chicago roared louder than ever. The arsenal of democracy was awake and it was unstoppable. June 7, 1944. Normandy, France. The morning fog clung low over the hedgerows as a column of M4 Shermans crept inland from the beaches. Their engines rumbled softly, exhaust fumes curling into the damp air. The lead tank, call sign Courageous, bore the white star of the U.S. 2nd Armored Division, still dusted with salt from the Channel crossing. Inside, Sergeant William Bill Carter wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned over the periscope. The claustrophobic space buzzed with noise. The metallic rattle of the turret ring, the groan of the engine, the nervous breathing of his crew. "Panzer ahead, 2 o'clock, shouted Private Levin, the gunner. Carter's blood ran cold. Where? Through the hedgerow gap, the dark silhouette of a Panther tank loomed like a crouching beast. Its gun pivoted slowly toward them, deliberate and confident. "Traverse left. Fire, fire now!" Levin squeezed the trigger. The 75mm shell struck the Panther's front armor and ricocheted like a stone skipping off ice. The German gun responded a second later, a thunderous crack, and the world outside exploded in dust and debris. The Sherman rocked violently as dirt and splinters rained over its hull. "Hit! We're hit, but she's still running," shouted the driver, Corporal Hines. Carter didn't hesitate. "Smoke screen. Reverse move." The Sherman backed into a shallow ditch, belching smoke. Another American tank rolled up beside them and fired, this time from the side, catching the Panther at its vulnerable angle. The German machine went up in flames, its ammunition cooking off in a chain of deafening pops. For the first time that morning, Carter allowed himself to breathe. That was the truth of Normandy. It wasn't one Sherman against one Panther. It was 5 Shermans against one. And for every tank that fell, another 2 rolled off the landing ships before dusk. By nightfall, the Bocage countryside was crawling with them. Their tracks chewed through mud and orchards, through farm walls and fences, turning the hedgerows into battlefields. German commanders grew frantic. Reports flooded headquarters. Shermans advancing from Carentan. Shermans at St. Lo. Shermans breaking through near Caen. To Oberleutnant Hennig, now commanding a Panther unit in the 12th SS Panzer Division, the scene was surreal. His tank sat camouflaged under apple trees. Watching a column of Shermans grind past a nearby field, he counted them. 10, 15, 20. He opened his mouth to give an order, but before he could, artillery rained down from somewhere beyond the horizon. The ground shook and the orchard erupted in chaos. "Retreat! Engines on, move!" As his Panther roared to life and tore through the trees, Hennig saw something that chilled him. Another wave of Shermans rolling in behind the smoke, not just from the road, from the hills, from the woods, from everywhere. That night, as German soldiers regrouped in a shattered farmhouse, one of them whispered what others were already thinking. "They're not tanks. They're a flood." And by dawn, that flood would sweep across Normandy, drowning every notion of German superiority beneath the sheer, relentless tide of olive green steel. December 19th, 1944. Near Bastogne, Belgium. The snow came down in thick, blinding sheets, muting the sound of distant artillery. Trees stood like skeletal sentinels in the frozen forest, their branches heavy with ice. The Ardennes was a place for ghosts, and in the last great German offensive of the war, that's exactly what the Allies felt they were fighting. Sherman tank engines coughed in the cold, their crews bundled in layers of wool and leather, breath steaming inside their cramped hulls. The 10th Armored Division had dug in along the road to Bastogne, holding the line against what seemed like the entire German army. Inside one of those Shermans, Blackjack, call sign B-24, Lieutenant Sam Reynolds checked his watch, then peered through his frozen periscope. The snow distorted everything, shapes moving like shadows between the pines. "Can't see a damn thing," grumbled Corporal Denton. "The driver. You'll see him soon enough," Reynolds muttered. Moments later, a faint rumble reached them, deep, rhythmic, unmistakable. Panzer engines. Then came the first flash, a Tiger I fired from over 800 yards away, its 80mm shell punching through the snow like a comet. The blast hit a nearby Sherman, sending a plume of fire skyward. "Christ, they've got Tigers," Denton shouted. "Yeah," Reynolds replied grimly, "and we've got more friends than they do." He keyed the radio. "All units, fire and move. Don't wait to be heroes." The forest erupted in chaos. Shermans fanned out, firing on the move, shells bursting among the trees. Their 75mm guns couldn't always penetrate German armor, but they aimed for the flanks, for the tracks, for the gun barrels, anything to cripple. For every Sherman destroyed, another roared in from the rear. Mechanics worked around the clock in the freezing mud, cannibalizing wrecks for parts, welding patches over holes, pouring hot oil into cold engines to keep them alive. And they just kept coming. When the German armored spearhead tried to force the road to Bastogne, they found not just tanks, but teams, Shermans working with tank destroyers, artillery, and infantry in perfect coordination. The Tigers might have been kings of the battlefield, but they were heavy, thirsty, and slow. Their fuel lines stretched thin through the snow-covered forests. By Christmas Eve, many sat abandoned, out of gas. Their crews huddled in the cold as Allied shells whistled overhead. Oberleutnant Karl Hennig, now commanding a battered Tiger company, stood beside one of his crippled machines. He could see the distant flashes of muzzle fire, the silhouettes of more Shermans advancing. "They're everywhere," his gunner whispered. "Everywhere." Hennig nodded, his expression unreadable. He'd long stopped mocking the American tanks. They weren't elegant, they weren't beautiful, but they were alive, and they kept coming. By the end of the Ardennes offensive, the Germans had lost over 700 tanks and assault guns. The Americans had lost nearly as many, but every one of theirs could be replaced within days. For the Wehrmacht, this was the breaking point. The panzer divisions that had once rolled triumphantly across Europe were now shattered, bleeding out on frozen ground against an enemy they could no longer outlast. In the ruins of a Belgian farmhouse that Christmas night, as snow fell quietly over the dead and dying, the rumble of Sherman engines carried through the dark like the heartbeat of an empire that refused to stop. March 7th, 1945. Remagen, Germany. Dawn broke over the Rhine in a cold mist, the river glinting like molten silver beneath the haze. On the western bank, U.S. forces gathered in a sea of mud, exhaustion, and anticipation. The Ludendorff Bridge, one of the last crossings still standing, loomed ahead, scarred and smoking from failed German demolition charges. Lined up behind the infantry were the workhorses of the Allied advance, columns upon columns of M4 Shermans, engines idling, their tracks caked with mud from the long road through France and Belgium. Lieutenant Sam Reynolds, still commanding his battle-worn Sherman Blackjack, climbed up onto the turret and scanned the far bank through binoculars. The bridge was still intact. It didn't seem real. "Looks like the Germans missed their chance," said his loader, grinning through a face smeared with oil and soot. Reynolds nodded. "Then we'd better not waste ours." He turned to his radio operator. "Get command. Tell them we're crossing now." Moments later, the Shermans began to roll forward, one after another, steel clattering over the bridge deck. The structure groaned beneath their weight, cables shuddering, rivets pinging loose, but it held. Infantrymen cheered from the banks as the first tanks reached the far side. Across the river, German defenders scrambled in confusion. Mortar fire splashed the water, machine guns rattled, but it was too late. The Allies had crossed the Rhine, Germany's last great natural barrier, and the Shermans led the charge. For Karl Hennig, the once proud Oberleutnant now commanding what remained of his armored company, the end had come into view. His Tiger sat camouflaged near the outskirts of Remagen, one of only 3 still operational. Fuel was scarce, ammunition scarcer. He'd ordered his men to hold fire, to conserve what little they had. Then he saw them. Through the smoke, down the ruined streets, came the unmistakable shapes. Shermans, dozens of them, fanning out like wolves on the hunt. He could still remember the arrogance of his first battles in Tunisia, the laughter, the confidence, how easy it had been to destroy those early American tanks. But now, watching this unstoppable procession, he felt something else entirely: respect and dread. His gunner looked to him for orders. "Herr Oberleutnant?" Hennig lowered his binoculars. "Don't fire," he said quietly. "It's finished." The Tiger's engine stayed silent as the Shermans rolled past, their crews alert but weary. On one of them, a crude inscription had been painted across the turret: "Berlin or bust." By late March, the Rhine crossings were secured. In the weeks that followed, Allied forces fanned out into the heart of Germany, Shermans leading the way through towns, forests and river valleys that had once been thought untouchable. Everywhere they went, they found surrendering soldiers, abandoned panzers, and civilians too tired to resist. The myth of German invincibility had collapsed, not under the weight of superior firepower, but under the sheer momentum of industrial will. Each Sherman that rumbled through Germany carried not just steel and men, but the promise that mass, when harnessed by discipline and purpose, could defeat even the most formidable machines. And so, by the spring of 1945, the tank once mocked as a Tommy cooker had become the symbol of an unstoppable truth. The power of persistence outweighs the perfection of design. May 8, 1945. Berlin, Germany. The guns had fallen silent. Smoke still drifted over the ruins of the city, curling through shattered windows and broken monuments. The Reichstag stood in ruins, its stone walls blackened by fire, and down the wide, debris-strewn avenues, a line of Allied tanks rumbled slowly forward. Shermans, their tracks crunching over rubble and twisted steel. Sergeant Bill Carter's crew sat in their tank, courageous, watching as Soviet soldiers raised their red flag above the city. "So this is it," murmured Carter. "The end of the road." Around them, Shermans bore the scars of years of war, bullet dents patched with scrap metal, names of fallen crewmen painted on their sides, flags draped from their antennas. These weren't museum pieces, and they were survivors. The final wave of a tide that had swept across 2 continents. Not far away, in a German field hospital turned POW camp, Karl Hennig sat beneath a gray blanket, staring out at the endless line of Allied vehicles rolling east. He'd lost his rank, his tanks, his war, but not his clarity. When an American officer passed by, he gestured toward the Shermans. "They are not beautiful," Hennig said in halting English. "But they do not stop." The officer smiled faintly. "That's the idea, Captain." The war had revealed a truth that would redefine armored warfare forever. On paper, the Sherman had been outgunned, outarmored, and outclassed by the German Panzers. Its 75mm gun struggled against the thick hides of tigers and panthers. Its thin armor turned it into a death trap when hit. And yet it won. It won not through superiority, but through sufficiency multiplied by infinity. Each Sherman was a compromise, but it was a reliable one. Its radial engine could start in freezing cold. Its suspension could handle rough terrain, and its standardized parts made repairs almost effortless. A Sherman destroyed on Monday could be replaced by Wednesday. For every Tiger Germany built, the Allies rolled out 10 Shermans. For every Panther that prowled the front, there were dozens of M4s advancing in formation, supported by aircraft, artillery, and infantry, all synchronized by the vast machine of American logistics. The German army had built masterpieces of engineering. The Americans built a system of war. By the time the shooting stopped, over 49,000 Shermans had been produced. They'd fought on every front, from the sands of North Africa to the hedgerows of France, the forests of Belgium, the bridges of the Rhine, and even the jungles of the Pacific, and they didn't stop with the war's end. In Korea, Israel, and the Middle East, Shermans, upgraded, repainted, reborn, kept fighting long after the Tiger and Panther had vanished into history books. They became the iron skeleton of post-war militaries across the world. To the Germans who once mocked it, the Sherman had been a joke. To the Americans who drove it, it was a lifeline. To history, it became something more profound, a reminder that victory in war belongs not to the most advanced machine, but to the machine that never stops coming. As night fell over Berlin that May, Carter and his crew climbed out of Courageous for the last time. The air was still, the world eerily quiet after years of chaos. Carter looked at the tank, its paint chipped, its hull blackened, and patted the steel side with a weary hand. "You weren't the best," he said softly, "but you got us here." The wind blew through the silent streets, carrying the echo of engines that had once filled the world, and somewhere in that sound, between the steel, the smoke, and the silence, lay the heartbeat of the Sherman, the tank that was never supposed to win, but did.